Ready? Feel extra loud. Is that weird? Is it extra loud? No? Okay. Man, Matt goes through this every Sunday. This is crazy. All right, let's open in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for all of your blessings. Please be with us tonight in our conversation and presentation of the materials we go over. Guide us towards wisdom and wise stewardship. And bless our fellowship tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so I printed out like 5 extra copies of this part 2, and I guess I should have printed more out because I still see people coming in. So if you have an extra copy between like a married couple or something, maybe, I don't know, Benner wants one, or get some people at the back. Okay.
Copy machine working?
It should be. I don't know if it's going to...
I wrote the name on mine. Here's one sitting here. Somebody want to take it and count it, or I could?
We got an extra one here. Anybody need one? Becca?
We could also go take my copies of it.
You have to undo the staple. All right. All right, so there's 2. So last week, for those of you who weren't here or who have terrible memories, we covered basic biblical stewardship and kind of what that entails. What is money and what is it not on a biblical, philosophical level. And then we went through how to use a financial calculator. I did not, there was some length creep that I was struggling with, trying to like convey all of the things swirling around in my head that I'm like, they need to know this. So initially I had been like, it'd be really cool to come up with some word problems as we go through these concepts where we could break out the financial calculators and see real world solutions. But alas, and good, as you guys are probably glad, we don't need to do that. So the lessons from the financial calculator oftentimes apply to some of the things that we're doing in here, such as, hey, if I save X amount of money into my 401k, what's it worth? If I start at age 25 or I wait until I'm 35, what kind of difference does that make? It makes a huge difference. So this is not going to be used in financial calculator, but there's implications of that from the first week. There's 2 major sections in this, savings strategies and protection strategies. And I've got savings strategies first. Savings is great for moving forward to the future with optimism, and the protection strategies are good for recognizing that we live in a fallen, sinful world, and the Lord could take you home at any time, or some other disaster may befall thee. Both elements are important when you are considering how to move through life as a steward of the assets that God has given you, as well as, especially for the men in the room who are married with families. I see that as kind of one of the high callings that we have, is to provide for our spouses and our children in a way that's, there's no cracks in the shields, if that makes sense. So, with that being said, we can go into, I'm going to do savings strategies first, then we'll go to protection strategies. The very last protection strategy is Craig King's area of expertise. I'm sort of dangerous with my knowledge, but he's actually kind of been there, done that for a whole career expert. So he's going to jump in when we get to the end there. So saving strategies. When it comes, and we've got some scripture verses, I would love for someone to read. Yes? Yep.
If you want to do this for another week, you've got a lot of material here, and there's 2 of you. If you want to do this for another week, you could.
Possibly.
We talked about that before, but I'm looking, there's a lot of material to cover between the 2 of you.
Yep. My intent sort of is to kind of highlight some of this stuff and then allow Q&A, and then you can read it in depth at home and then ask me questions. Or I don't know if Drew Ishmael is here tonight. He's also a certified financial planner, at least my equal when it comes to this kind of stuff. So we've got a couple of people in the church that you guys can go to with questions. But if we end up running out of time, then we can do that. I'm out of town for the next 2 weeks, which is part of the reason why I'm like, let's go. Well, that's true. All right, so Anybody want to look up Proverbs 21:20? First scripture verse here in the material, first paragraph. Go for it.
The wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp theirs down.
Mine is precious treasure and oil are in a wise man's dwelling. When it comes to biblical stewardship of personal wealth, which is kind of what we're talking about, you may recall from last week, there are different types of what called treasure. There's your personal wealth, there's also your physical health, and there's the relationships. In here, we're talking specifically about personal wealth. Setting aside money for the future is when we're talking about savings, and setting aside money for the future is where you get that verse, precious treasure are in a wise man's dwelling. Wise men are good at saving and self-denial, which is a key part of saving. That's how you get the wealth. There's 4 main destinations of savings. Saving for yourself, which I'm going to say includes your spouse because the two become one flesh. So when you are saving for yourself, you're saving for your future needs and retirement, things like that, as well as the needs of, the second one is the needs of your family. Let's look up, I'll do Proverbs 6:6 real quick here while I'm on point 1, but somebody look up Mark 7. Somebody else look up 1 Timothy 5:8.
Mark 7:10, for Moses said, honor your father and your mother, and whoever reviles father or mother must surely die. But you say, if a man tells his father or his mother, whatever you have gained from me is Corban, that is given to God, then you no longer permit him to do anything for his father or mother, thus making void the word of God by your tradition that you have handed down, and many such things you do.
So that passage in Mark, one of the points being made there is an uncomfortable one in today's society. You have some duties and obligations to parents who are needing help. That is, I would say, it's not ideal when that happens. It's almost a perversion of like what's supposed to be. But there are some people in the church that we probably all know who are in a position where they're having to take care of their parents. And I view that, so Mark 7, where Jesus talks about, don't give money to charity so that you don't have to help your parents. So there's kind of a hierarchy of duty there where charity of others is on number 4. It's below the providing for the needs of the family. And then, I don't know, does anybody have 1 Timothy 5:8? Go for it.
But if any provide not for his own, and especially for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith, and is worse than an infidel.
Yep. So there's a picture there. Again, we're going through hierarchy. So the needs of the family includes your parents, and in per Mark, and then in 1 Timothy, it's members of your household. It's for family members extensively. I'm going to argue that includes things like siblings, aunts, uncles, etc., but particularly people of your own household. So this is including children. If you are not taking care of them, you are worse than an unbeliever. I want to say the word there is anathema, which is damned to hell. I'm pretty sure it's quite strong. Anyway, that being said, needs of the family is going to come above inheritance of children, as far as I can tell. There's obviously exceptions to this. If you want guidance on relegating those two against each other, I would talk to Matt or Stephen. And then followed by the charity of others. So that's Proverbs 19:17, which I'll pull up real quick here. Proverbs 19:17, whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will repay him for his deed. And I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. I'm going to go back to the yourself and spouse. What's interesting here, Proverbs 6:6-8. The verse there, go to the ant, O sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief officer or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. There's a picture there where ants, Solomon is pointing out the wisdom of ants, and part of the whole thing of Proverbs is get wisdom. Part of the picture of wisdom there is pointing to ants who gather their food in the summertime to prepare for the wintertime. If you apply that analogy to our lives, we all kind of have a spring, summer, fall, winter cycle to our life where when you're in your teenage years, young 20s, everything is lovely. The music just kind of wafts through the air and everything looks a little pink. That's the spring of your life. And then you get into your 30s and you feel really productive. Your joints start to hurt a little bit more than you want them to. I would call that kind of your summer. Your fall is starting to get into, I would call that kind of your 60s plus. And then the winter is 50s plus. I don't know. Somebody correct me on this. The winter of your life is where you can no longer work, or you can't work meaningfully enough to bring in food to provide for yourself. That's going to be your 70s, 80s, and 90s. So there's a real point to be made here when people are like, well, you don't see retirement as a concept set forth in Scripture. It's like, sure, right. But life expectancy wasn't always in the 90s like it is today, and you arguably you're providing for yourself by being a wise steward, saving up for those winter years that you are likely to hit, so as to not be a burden on your children and make them have to focus on point number 2, which is providing for the needs of family. So hence I'm putting that at the top. All right. 3 points to remember there. How much is enough? That's saving for yourself. It's easy to focus on the first 3 and ignore the charity of others. And that's where I think the question by Ron Blue, how much is enough? Who owns it and how much is enough? Those are really good questions to remind yourself of. As another thing to remember is as the wealth accumulates, the temptation, as Tolkien put so wonderfully in Lord of the Rings, is, Smaug is sitting on a pile of gold, and, kind of the bigger the pile of gold gets underneath him, the more protective he is of that gold. That kind of dragonish tendency likes to sink into our hearts a bit. So as your net worth grows, and it's hard to picture sometimes in our teens and 20s and 30s, but I see this in clients who are in their 60s, and they've done a tremendous job of saving, and it doesn't quite turn into my precious ring of power kind of stuff, but it kind of does. It becomes very easy for people to really fixate on their money and I can't possibly lose it. And this is everything. It's my whole world, and that can become an unhealthy point to arrive at. So I've got some scripture verses there. We won't look them up. And then general rule of thumb when you're saving for yourself for your retirement, I have heard 20%. I've heard 30%, 25 seems to be a common one. I would say 25 to 25%. If you are saving that for paying for your own retirement needs and leaving an inheritance to your kids, you're probably going to be okay. Anything above 25%, I'm going to call that a stretch goal. And if you run a financial calculator and you're like, hey, I can survive on retirement and leave something behind to my kids if I save 25% of my income, and I want to give everything above and beyond that away to charity and make that gifts to others, totally, that's part of the joy of being stewards of your own lives, is you get to make that decision and is between you and God. But 20 to 25% of your income being saved is kind of a good goal.
Does that depend on what stage of life you start?
Yeah. If you're 50 and you don't have anything saved, you are in trouble, and you should be saving way more than 25%. So it's a good clarifier. This is really good advice for people in their 20s and 30s. If you are older than 35, good chance you're going to have to start saving more than 20 to 25% to make it comfortable. Okay. What I've done here is I've split up by those 4 categories, I've split up some of the preferred savings options. So saving for yourself and your spouse, the first one that everybody thinks of is your workplace retirement plan. That's 401ks, 403bs, 401as, TSP plans for government workers, 457 plans, etc. There are 2 basic kinds of retirement plans. There's corporate-sponsored versions of it, and there's individual-sponsored versions of it. You can, I'll get ahead of myself there. Generally speaking, you can always do the individual side of things. You may have to do backdoor contributions and whatnot, but you can generally do those all the time. The company-sponsored versions of that, you've got to be with a company. The cool thing is, if you run your own company, you can set one of these up yourself. It doesn't have to be a 401k. You've also got like simple IRAs, SEP IRAs, and individual 401ks for sole practitioners. The IRS has a number of tax advantage savings routes available to people who are just running their own businesses, as well as people who are a part of a major corporation. One of the main benefits of workplace retirement plans is you can sock away a ton of money. And another main benefit is oftentimes you get a match from your employer. So if you put in, and I mentioned before, a common setup for this is you put in 6%, they put in 3%. It's kind of standard. There are a lot of companies that offer a lot better. I think MasterCard, for example, was, if I recall from, this is like way back when I had a prospective client from MasterCard, and they showed me their 401k stuff. If you put in 9%, MasterCard put in like 11%. It was a huge deal. So it totally depends company to company. One of the things to keep in mind with those matches is there's oftentimes a vesting schedule. So if you are trying to balance, hey, do I pay off high interest rate credit cards as opposed to save money into my 401k? One of the considerations there is, are you going to very likely be at that employer for at least 5 years when the vesting schedules are fully implemented? Because with a vesting schedule, a very common one is for the first 5 years that you're with an employer, you buy in to the employer matches by 20% increments over those 5 years. There's other ways they can structure it, but that's a very common one. So every dollar you put into your retirement plan, you are always going to get that back. But for dollars that they contribute, if you quit after a year, you only keep like 20% of it. So that can be, getting the full employer match is a really good idea. But if you're like, yeah, I'm going to be here for 2 years and then I'm going to go away, then not partaking in that employer match can start to make sense if you've got high interest loan credit cards and stuff that you really need to work on. I've got some of those in the pros and cons. The individual retirement 401ks also allow for loans. There's various thoughts on 401k loans. The basic way that those operate, if you take a 401k loan out, you borrow against the balance. The money is no longer invested in the marketplace, and you have to pay it back with an interest rate. And essentially what that does is, let's say you borrow 20 grand out, you have to pay that back. I believe it's 5 years is the time parameter that the IRS, I'm getting a nod, so that's correct. You get a 5-year window in which you have to pay that money back, or it's treated as a taxable distribution and may be subject to early withdrawal penalties of 10% on top of your income taxes. So taking a loan out is kind of dangerous, because if you get terminated or you can't pay it back or anything like that, it's treated as a taxable distribution plus penalties if you're under age 59 and a half. And the interest rate that you're paying, technically you are paying it to yourself. So, and that is, it has to be a fair market interest rate, but the 401k plan provider gets to set that up. Oftentimes it's like a 6% rate of return that you've got to pay back to yourself. So if you borrow $20,000, you got to pay that $20,000 in over the next 5 years, and you've got to kick in a 6% interest rate. That 6% interest rate does go to your account balance, but it's not being invested in the meantime. And essentially what you're being forced to do is you're replicating your own rate of return instead of letting the markets do it for you. And there's another downside, which is as you pay those 401k loans back, you're doing it with after-tax dollars. So those dollars are getting taxed twice. You're taking money out of a 401k that's pre-tax, borrowing it, and then when you pay it back, you're doing it on money that's been taxed to your income. So it's not very efficient. Anyway, point being, there are ways to get at 401k dollars, but it's not like ideal. So typically it's not where you want to save money for anything other than retirement itself. I bring this up, it's probably not super common or going to be common in this room, but I see a bunch of people who take out 401k loans to pay for their kids' college tuition. And this is not a great idea. Personal retirement accounts is the next one down. There's a number of pros for that, one of which is you get full investment control over your investments. 401ks will often do a limited menu of investments. Some of them will have like open brokerage links where you can go to like Fidelity and trade it as much as you want and buy Bitcoin or something like that. But most of the time in a 401k, you are locked into a limited menu of options, and you may be in like a target date retirement fund, whereas on the IRA side, you can go off and buy Bitcoin and nobody cares. I use that as an extreme example. You can invest in a bunch of stuff in an IRA. That's one of the advantages to the individual retirement account side. For those of you who I'm going maybe this is 2 nights worth. One of the cool things between the company-sponsored version and the individual side, between points 1 and 2 here, is you can roll money back and forth between the two. So if you retire from a job and you've got an old 401k, you can roll that into the 401k for your new job. You can leave it where it sits, unless you've got a really low balance and they want to get rid of you, so they cut you a check and they hand it to you and they tell you to get lost. Oftentimes for plans, it's like if you have over $10,000 balance, they'll allow it to sit in the plan even if you're no longer employed there, and under $10,000, they cut you a check and they tell you to get lost. But you can take that amount of money, sometimes you can leave it there, you can roll it into a new 401k plan at your new employer, or you can roll it over to an IRA and manage it yourself, or hire somebody as a financial advisor to manage it for you. So you've got some options there. There's also, in the IRA side, and this is where sometimes it makes sense to do a 401k rollover to an IRA, because one of the things that you get besides full investment control is you get special access. So if you're buying your first house, if a kid just got born, if you've been disabled, there's a bunch of exceptions written into being able to access that money early. And by early, I mean before age 59 and a half. So what happens is if you try and pull money out of a retirement account before age 59 and a half, you will get hit with, for tax-deferred money, you get hit with penalties of 10% plus income taxes on the tax-deferred stuff. That 10% penalty really stings. But there's some ways to get around that, and that is where IRAs offer there's a list of 9 exceptions that you can pull money out of an IRA where you can't do that from a 401k. I've got some cons there listed. You can't take a loan against your IRA, whereas you can take a loan against a 401k, and there are income phase-outs for contributions to IRAs and Roth IRAs. So if you make too much money, you can still do it, but there's some hoops you got to jump through and some things you got to be mindful of. And that typically starts around $150,000, $200,000, depends on if you're single or married filing jointly. Third thing on here is health savings account. This is a really big one, and lots of people do not know about it. I know Benner and I have talked about it a couple of times. HSA accounts, so there's 3 kind of main ways that people tend to get health insurance coverage. There's low deductible plans, high deductible plans, and then what's not insurance, and which is like your Samaritan Ministries health sharing kind of approach, which isn't technically insurance. HSAs are health savings accounts. They are only available for people with high deductible plans. So one of the downsides of a high deductible plan is if you've got a bunch of medical expenses because you've got a kid that did something stupid in the backyard and broke a leg, and you're like, great, that's a $7,000 hospital bill. Well, with a low deductible plan, you're gonna be out of pocket for maybe $1,000, whereas for a high deductible plan, you might be out of pocket for $6,000. If you have a high deductible plan, that's gonna compute into having more money in the bank as an emergency fund. Something to be mindful of, but it does allow you to open up an HSA, and HSAs are amazing. And the reason why is because they are the most tax-efficient savings vehicle on the planet, other than organized crime. And essentially the way this works is when you save money into a 401k and an IRA, if it's tax-deferred, so we're ignoring Roth here, if you save into a tax-deferred vehicle, it bypasses your federal and state income taxes. So, for example, you're making $100,000 a year, life is good. You put $10,000 into your 401k, and that's tax-deferred, which means you get taxed on $90,000 of income, which feels great because your tax burden went down a lot. With HSAs, you get that benefit for federal and state taxes, but you also get to write it off against FICA taxes. And that is 7.5% that comes out of your payroll to go towards Medicare and Social Security. If you're self-employed, you've got to pay double that 7.5%, and it goes to 15% of your income. HSA savings are really cool because unlike 401ks and IRAs, they bypass not only federal and state taxes, they also bypass an extra 7.5 or 15% FICA tax. So they're really efficient there. They grow tax-free. You can invest the money. The balances, unlike an FSA, a flex savings account, FSAs are good for certain things, like if you've got kids in daycare, FSAs can cut checks to daycares, and correct me on this, I don't think HSAs can. So sometimes there's reasons why you would do an FSA instead of an HSA, but FSAs, there's typically like a limited amount that you can roll over year. It's like $1,000 or something. Somebody fact check me on that. But with HSAs,
600, I think, what my company has.
600. So 600 every year with an FSA, with a flex savings account, you can roll like $600 over, and then the rest of it just disappears into the wind. With an HSA, you can keep rolling that balance over and contributing. If you're a family, it's like $7,600 a year. I don't have the contribution limits in here. But it's basically, for a family, it's slightly bigger than like an IRA, what you can put in there every year. That can grow and grow and grow, and you can max that puppy out year after year after year, let it grow. The growth is tax-free, and then what's really cool is at any point, you can pull money out of that HSA to pay for medical expenses. Somebody goes to the emergency room, the HSA can pay for it, and it leaves that account completely tax-free. Versus if you pull it out of the IRA, you got to pay income taxes on that distribution and also maybe a penalty. On the HSA, you can pull it out at any time for medical expenses, and it's tax-free. If you pull it out for non-medical expenses, it is taxable as income. And this is the part that's ouch. If you pull it out before age, was it 65? I think it's 65. If you pull it out before age 65 for non-medical expenses, they charge you a 20% penalty tax on top of income taxes. So it is not designed to be used for anything except medical expenses, but for medical expenses, it's amazing. And where it makes a ton of sense is you can pay for your Medicare premiums out of it. And what's the way we're currently set up as a nation is when you hit age 65, you have to enroll in Medicare. And you are going to be on Medicare for, figure, 20 years. Those are monthly premiums that you're going to have to pay, and then there's Medigap coverage. People who are over 65 know all about what I'm talking about. Figure today, for a 65-year-old going on Medicare, you can expect to spend about $6,000 a year to $6,500 per year on Medicare per person. So if you've got husband and wife, and you've been at a job where they've just been picking up your medical expenses, and that's really nice for them, when you turn 65 and you retire, you're looking at like $13,000 a year. In today's money, you're looking at like $13,000 a year out of pocket that you got to start spending. And an HSA can provide that completely tax-free, unlike an IRA where you got to hit income taxes pulling it out. All of which to say is if you are in a high deductible, if you're not on a medical, so like Sarah and I are on a Samaritan Ministries health sharing program. We don't qualify. But if we were on some sort of Obamacare plan or workplace plan, I would 100% be choosing a high deductible plan. I would have a nicer emergency fund, and I would be maxing out the HSA every year, arguably before I did a Roth. It's that good. Okay? So far, the three things we've talked about all have kind of some limitations to them. And that's where you get to the next one, which is item number 4, is taxable accounts. The nice thing about a taxable account, and this is going to be like a bank account, CDs at your bank. You can open up just an investment account through like your Robinhood app, or you can go to a custodian like Schwab or Fidelity or Vanguard and just open up an individual or a joint investment account. What's cool about those is there's no contribution limits. You can pull the money out anytime you want. You can invest in whatever you want. It's very hands-free, but you've got a couple of downsides, and one of which is there's a drag because you're having to pay taxes on those gains. So now instead of tax-deferred or tax-free growth, you're paying long-term capital gains, short-term capital gains, and you make people like Scott very happy when you hand him a 1099 composite and it's 30 pages long. So there are some downsides there, but there are some real upsides. And the upside to taxable accounts is they are very good at saving for needs that you have before retirement. So if you need the money before 60, you could make the case you could put it into a Roth and pull out your contribution basis without penalty. There's some other options, but in general, if you need the money before age 60, a brokerage account is one of the safer ways to spend it or save it because you can pull it out freely at any time. Any questions so far? Yep.
Where do you put that? You put it in a high yield saving account?
Yeah, I would put it in a taxable account. That option number 4, unless you're you know, a crazy person. You put it in like gold or silver, like somebody sitting across the room from me, my dad. That's the physical assets, number 6. But yeah, so generally the rule of thumb under taxable accounts is, and I make mention here in this paragraph, if you read through it, emergency funds are one of the first places to start when you're looking at saving, is have 3 to 6 months. I've heard another rule of thumb is 6 to 12 months of living expenses set aside in some place safe in like a high yield money market or in a money market fund or like a high yield savings account. Right now, what's really cool is those things are paying out like 4%. So you can stick it away someplace, get a nice, easy, safe 4% return. Those are typically backed by U.S. Treasuries or by FDIC safety nets. So it is pretty safe. You're going to get 4%. You can make the case all you're doing is keeping up with inflation, but that's a lot better than nothing. Kind of the rule of thumb that I tell clients is if you need the money in the next 5 years, don't put it in the stock market, because the stock market can absolutely blow downwards for a 5-year stint, as people who know what the lost decade is. The standard example there would be in like 2000 in the dot-com bubble crash. In 2000 to 2001, the stock market dropped 25% because of the dot-com crash, and then 2001 to 2002, it dropped another 25% because a couple of large buildings went down in New York, and you ended up losing 50% in the stock market over 2 whole years. It took a while for us to reach the bottom, and it didn't recover until like middle of 2007. It took a long time to get back up to even. So general rule of thumb there is if you need the money in the next 5 years, stick it somewhere super safe, either money market funds, high yield savings accounts, CDs can be a good one, or maybe a short-term bond ladder. You can find those various places, and don't risk it in stock market or longer-term bonds. Does that answer? Yep. Any other questions? Okay. I do have insurance contracts listed here as a honorary mention on number 5. Whole life and universal life does have its place as kind of it's got some tax deferred nature to it. I don't typically recommend that to people who haven't done things like max out their 401k already, but it is an option you can use, as well as annuities, which are essentially privatized Social Security, if you will. There's 3 ways to lock up income for the rest of your life. There's Social Security, which you're forced to pay into, unless I think you're Amish. Maybe we could all convert. And then the second one is pensions. Pensions are corporate-sponsored versions of Social Security, and annuities are insurance carriers' versions of it. So the idea behind all 3 of those is you send off money to someone else for the working years of your life, and then you retire, and they start sending the money back. With Social Security, the other person on the end of that agreement is the federal government. For pensions, it is it's typically it's basically the company itself that has to follow pension guarantee guidelines, and they got to keep cash reserves, et cetera. And there's oftentimes insurance companies involved, and it's very complex. But that's a pension. And then for an annuity, that is an individual insurance contract that you're buying with an insurance carrier that's doing the same thing. You send them money, and then they send it back. And the idea behind annuities, as well as pensions and Social Security, is to keep you living if you live for a really long time. So if you've got family history where you live well into your 90s or early 100s, an annuity can make a lot of sense, actually, because the insurance company is going to hope you die before then, and you know better because you know your family history. Okay. Saving for the needs of family. I've got, for parents, it's probably, hopefully, very rare that you're going to have to provide for your parents in their old age. If you do, I would recommend just doing like a taxable brokerage account so you get free access to it whenever is needed, or conceivably like a long-term care insurance policy, which we can cover later. For disabled children, this is a big one. In certain areas of financial planning space, if you've got kids who have Down syndrome or something else where they cannot go off and lead a healthy, productive life, providing for those kids is a major aspect of financial planning, and oftentimes it includes irrevocable trusts. It involves life insurance. There's a whole conversation to be had there. But for normal, healthy, non-disabled kids, you got three main options. You've got education savings accounts, you've got custodial accounts, and you've got accounts that you hoard to yourself and you don't let them see. On the education accounts, you got two types, 529 plans and Covered L ESA accounts. Covered L ESA accounts used to be way more popular because they would fund private K through 12 education, and 529s weren't allowed to. 529s were only for college. That has since changed. Thank you, Donald Trump. So 529s can now pay for K through 12. In the state of Missouri, that's limited to $10,000 per year per child for K through 12 education, which is a lot. And then for college, there's no limits. That I say college, also think trade schools. Also think room and board for the aforementioned. So it can pay for things for books, tuition, various fees, room and board. There's a bunch of things that education savings accounts can spend money on. And it's cool because they're tax advantaged. So if you've got a kid that you're like, I want to be able to send one or two of my kids to an education of higher learning or private school in high school or trade school or whatever, I got my certified financial planner designation. My prior company was lovely enough to pay for it, but if I had to pay for it out of pocket, it would have cost me about $7,000. And this would have paid for it. What's cool about something like a 529 plan is when you put money into it, you get to actually write that contribution off against your Missouri state taxes, not federal. It grows tax-free, tax-deferred, which is really nice. And then if you cut a check to the educational institution or to like room and board costs, you get to pull it out tax-free, which is really nice. There are penalties if you pull it out for non-education. For things like 529s, you can actually switch beneficiaries. So if you set up a 529 for one kid and they decide to be losers and not go to trade school and they go to college instead, you can talk to Matt and he'd be like, cut them out. And you can actually like take that 529 plan and switch it to the kid who is going to trade school like they should be. Okay. Totally. People online, I'm totally joking. Item number 2 here is custodial accounts. The nice thing about a custodial account is it gives some tax advantage stuff. So for a UTMA or UGMA, that stands for Unified Trust to Minors account or Unified Gift to Minors account. Depends on the state. I forget. I think Missouri is UTMA. Other states maybe UGMA. But essentially what happens there is you put money in a custodial account. It is actually a gift to your kid when they turn at 18, so it's age of majority. In Missouri, you're allowed to delay that by up to age 21. So you get to choose, but between ages 18 and 21, your kids will get that money. Once you cut a check and it goes into the account, it's not really yours. You can't just pull it out to do whatever you want with it willy-nilly. Actually, I don't know for distributions. Maybe take that with a grain of salt. But you can't like switch it to a different kid. When they turn those ages, they get that money. So if you've got an 18-year-old in your hands that isn't being responsible and they want to go off and buy a Corvette, they get to use the money for that. It's their choice once they turn age of majority. One of the nice things for it is it gets tax advantage growth. So if you put money in and it grows, the first $1,000 of growth is tax-free. The second $1,000 of growth is taxed at kiddie tax rates, and then it's taxed at the parents' tax rates. For smaller accounts, that can be really nice. It gets some tax-friendly growth. And then the third option is taxable accounts in your name. You get full control over the money. I like the third option myself because it doesn't shoehorn me into spending for education expenses or for them getting the money at 18 if they're being irresponsible. And it allows for you to set aside money for your kids to pay for things like their first wedding. They bought their first house. They're buying their first car. They're paying off student loans, and you want to match dollar for dollar. What else? Anything. Yeah, just in general, like if they're being responsible with their life, you can help them along the way for things that aren't technically education and may be happening later than 18 to 21 years old. The downside of that is you have got to pay taxes on the gains and growth. Questions? Nope. Okay, moving on. Saving for the inheritance of kids. Technically, you can leave pretty much any assets behind to kids. I I say generally speaking there at the first sentence on the bottom of page 2 because if we're doing like advanced trust planning, technically it's not theirs, but you can leave stuff behind to your kids. But there's 4 things that are really nice for leaving behind to kids. Roth accounts. Amazing to inherit a Roth IRA. And the nice thing that's nice to inherit about a Roth IRA is for IRAs and Roth IRAs, when you inherit that from your parents, you've got a 10-year window in which to pull it all out. With a IRA, you get a 10-year window to pull it out of an inherited IRA, and you got to pay taxes on that as it goes. And you may have to pull out like required minimum distributions within those 10 years. Whereas for a Roth IRA, there's no RMDs. You can leave it sitting in there for a whole decade and get tax-free growth as the kid and pull it all out in year 10 and have a completely tax-free inheritance. So that is kind of like the nicest way to inherit assets. The second nicest way is to inherit it from life insurance. That is a tax-free death benefit, tax-free to the kids. It is included in estate taxes, so if you're going to leave behind more than $10 million or $20 million to your kids, you've got to think about that. Good problem to have. And then physical assets and brokerage accounts, what's nice about those, and physical assets, I'll use my parents as an example. We got from my grandma, they inherited some rental houses. Those rental houses were bought well below market value when she bought them 20 years, 30 years prior. They had doubled or tripled in value, and they get a step up in cost basis. So then when the kids inherit them and they want to sell those rental houses, they can sell them and not have like a $200,000 capital gains, $50,000 tax or $40,000 tax bill staring them at the face because they get a step up in basis. And that's for physical assets as well as brokerage accounts. You got to pay taxes as it goes, but any unrealized gains, they get a step up in basis, and that's nice for the kids. So those are kind of the 4 nicest areas to inherit money as a kid.
Now, it's something maybe Craig's going to talk about later. Are there like different trusts and stuff that you're going to talk about?
Yeah.
To avoid that, right? Or to, okay, never mind. I'll just let you speak, but there's some strategies obviously for that.
Yeah. Saving for the charity of others. There's 2 kinds of charities if you think through. There's charities, and then there's charities. Charity cases, maybe as it were. The big italics charities are 501c3s, charitable organizations that the IRS deems to be charities, and you can write those off when you give to them. Technically, you can, if you're itemizing, you can write that off against your income taxes. So that's going to include things like church, private foundations, political donations. If you want to give to the Democrat Party, you can do that and write it off on your taxes. Civil defense organizations, things like that. I'm sorry, I can't help myself. And then for the problem there is, so for giving to official charities, there's 3 main places that really make sense, and one of which is actually your IRA. So for younger folks, what happens a lot of the time is you'll start working for a company in your 20s and 30s, you'll have a 401k available to you, and if they're really nice, if the company's really nice, they've set it up as a Roth 401k. So it's got Roth options in there. Oftentimes what happens, let's say the 6% with a 3% match example, you put in 6%, you can save that into the Roth vehicle. When the company puts in their 3% match, they can technically, but they generally don't save it in Roth. They put it in the standard tax-deferred vehicle. And then you end up with dollars of each kind. What's cool about the dollars of each, about having tax-deferred stuff is you can actually cut checks directly to charities from your IRA. So let's say you retire, take that 401k balance, roll it into an IRA. When you hit age 70 and a half, super wonky age, but when you hit 70 and a half years old, you can cut a check directly from your IRA to the charity, and it never touches your income taxes. The alternative is you take a check from your IRA, you got to pay income taxes on it, and then when you cut a check to charity, it may or may not be deductible because by the time you're retired, you're probably taking the standard deduction instead of itemized deductions, and you don't actually get to write off gifts to charity if you're taking the standard deduction. You only get it if you're taking the itemized deduction, which means you've got to be giving away a lot of money to take the itemized deduction. So what's cool about IRAs is you can take the standard deduction and you can give money to charity like church on a weekly, daily, monthly, annual basis, and cut the check directly to charity, never have hit your income taxes. So IRAs are, as you get older, 401ks and IRAs tax deferred are actually really good vehicles for gifting to kids. Sorry, gifting to charities. Sorry. I've got two other examples in here. It's probably not on the younger people's radar, but I'll mention them anyway. You've got donor-advised funds. What's cool about donor-advised funds is you can give assets directly to a fund. You can take the deduction in the year in which you give it. You can stretch it over multiple years, and the assets can, they don't have to be given to a charity right away. You can sit on it and let it invest and grow tax-free, and then later, at your discretion, cut checks to charity. You see this oftentimes with people who, for example, if you're a highly paid corporate executive and you've got a huge tax bill coming in because of a deferred comp plan or something like that, or you've got highly appreciated corporate company stock that you bought Apple stock a long time ago and you bought 20 grand worth of it and now it's worth 100 grand. You can actually, instead of selling that stock, realizing capital gains and then giving it to charity, you can take the stock without selling it, donate it straight to a donor-advised fund, not pay capital gains taxes, and not have to give it to charity right away. You can let it sit and invest and grow for 10 years, and then later, when you're old and bored, you can start going to fundraiser opportunities and just, as you feel called, and you're like, it's a good cause. I think I'll write them $5,000, and I have money that I've set aside for charitable intent in my donor advice fund, and I think I'll write them a check for $5,000 and give it on because I've designated that money for charity. And then when you die, you can leave that donor advice fund, I'm pretty sure, in the care of like your kids or further stewards. And then charitable trusts as well. You've got lead trust, remainder trusts. I won't go into those, but those are also options. You can set up a trust to kind of mimic some of the donor-advised funds, but you get a little bit tighter control than a donor-advised fund. For individuals in need, this is like when you're giving a minivan to somebody at church who needs one, or something like that. That's where physical assets, brokerage accounts, bank accounts, those are good and handy because the IRS is not going to recognize those as writing off against taxes. So just having full control of the money so you can write a check to someone in need. So kind of what Sarah and I do, we had talked to Matt and Stephen about this before we did it, was we set aside 10% of our income for tithe. About just over half of that goes to Church of the Word, and the other half of it goes into a savings account where we can do things like cut checks to individuals as God calls us. And so that's part of our tithe, but we're setting aside for things that aren't necessarily a 501c3. Questions? Thoughts? Moving on.
Real quick on that.
Yes.
If you bought a minivan and it may impact your inheritance tax if it's a really big, if you wrote somebody a check or bought them a van for 40 grand.
Yep.
That's above the annual limit that you can give. So
Yep.
if something really big, you're that wealthy, write it out to Chateau Dias Bed and Breakfast, not for profit, I'll take it. But talk to your tax advisor if it's a big.
I'm on a similar deal with a different person.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is a good point. So it used to be in the U.S. that gifts and inheritances were treated separately, and then came the unified gift, and I'm forgetting the full name of the law. But what they did was they squeezed those together. So you can gift in your life and leave an inheritance in your life. It's the same amount. There's an annual exclusion and a lifetime exclusion. The annual exclusion, I believe right now, is $16,000 per year per beneficiary. So, is it 19? Scott would know. So let's say it's let's say he's right and it's 19,000. So if my parents wanted to give Sarah and I money, not that they would, 18. We'll say it's 18,000 because that's what Scott is settling on. So my dad can give me 18,000, or was it? Are you sure it wasn't like 20? 18. So my dad can give me $18,000. My mom can give me $18,000. My dad can give Sarah $18,000, and my mom can give Sarah $18,000. Anything above those amounts, you have to disclose it to the IRS. So if my dad gives me a check for $20,000, that's $2,000 over the annual exclusion. $2,000 of that is reported, and it eats into my lifetime exemption, which is like that $10 million per married person. I think was it? It's like 11. Is it going all the way up to 15? Yeah. So per.
Like just under 14.
Okay. It started off when Trump doubled it. It went to 11, and it's been climbing with inflation since, and I lose track of it. Yeah.
It's 8 o'clock. Just keep your eye on the clock.
Cool. Okay. Any other questions or thoughts on saving strategies? All right. At the risk of glazing you over more, let's go into protection strategies. I've got 4 major kinds listed here. I will keep it fairly light so as to give Craig his time. Life insurance, disability insurance, long-term care, and estate planning. So 3 kinds of insurance and 1 kind of legal stuff. When you are considering protecting your family, I would start with life insurance, and then I would go to either disability insurance or estate planning. And then long-term care insurance kind of comes later. We have some older folks in the room. I have a section there on long-term care insurance on page 7. And there's a typo there, which I feel bad about because I might not actually cover it. But I'll talk about the life insurance first. This is the first place I would start. I see a lot of people who don't have life insurance or who do have it and are woefully underinsured, not necessarily here at Church of the Word, just in general. This is particularly true of younger folks who they get married, they get a couple of kids, they get a house, and so the example here that I just put in here is a good example of this. Back up to the top there. I'll back up just for a sec. There's 2 major kinds of life insurance. There's term life insurance, which is designed to be in action for 10 to 30 years, and then it is designed to kind of go away. And then there's permanent life insurance, which is designed to pay you out at age 121 or sooner, depending on when you die. Technically, if you make it to age 121, most whole life or permanent life insurance policies will actually cut you a check tax-free and be like, here you go, get lost. Most people don't make it to that age. But the permanent life, either whole life or universal life, there's 2 different kinds, variations. They've got their own strengths and weaknesses and reasons to own them. But by and large, this is me personally, I do not believe in, this is a point of agreement between myself and Mr. Ramsey, who I picked on last week a little bit. Most young people should not be buying permanent life insurance until they have at least until they have their term life insurance well in hand because of the price difference. Because permanent life is guaranteed to pay out as opposed to, well, maybe you die in the next 20, 30 years, maybe you don't. As a young person, the price is substantially different. The bottom paragraph here of page 4, I'll use this as an illustration. So I did get referred to a young client couple this past month. And young, married, no kids. They're trying for kids. They've got a house with a mortgage. They've just been married for a short time. The wife had a whole life insurance policy that she had been sold from an old college friend, which is a very common way that people buy their first whole life insurance policy is somebody they knew in college went to work for one of the big carriers. And when you go to work for a big life insurance carrier out of college, they encourage you to start calling everybody in your contact list and trying to sell them life insurance. And oftentimes that gets sold into a whole life insurance policy. And my belief is that is oftentimes because they pay better premiums than term life insurance policy. But they came in, she had a $200,000 death benefit policy that they were paying $266 a month on. One of the problems with that is they don't have a ton of money because they are trying to pay off $20,000 in credit cards and $80,000 in student loans, and they've got a mortgage and they owe $10,000 on one of their vehicles. They are trying to budget and pay down their debts. And so instead of and the insurance rep that she had met with them after they got married, and his bright idea was to sell them another whole life insurance policy for the same death benefit face amount to the husband for, I don't know what the monthly quote was, but it was somewhere close to the $266 a month, which would have had them at like $500 a month. And instead, what we did was we wrote them a $1 million 20-year term policy on him, a $750,000 term policy 20-year on her. So $1.75 million of combined coverage for 20 years, and it cost them $82 a month all in all. There is no comparison on the price. And oftentimes what happens is people get with a whole life insurance carrier rep. I see this a lot, and it's a pet peeve. Please forgive me for harping on this, but they get sold like a $250,000 life insurance policy, and they're like, I've got life insurance. And it's like, okay, well, if you did a needs analysis and figured out what kind of insurance coverage is actually appropriate, you need to add a 0 to that, possibly. And you can't afford to add a 0 to it on the permanent life structure. So I view permanent life as really good for savings vehicles, which is why I have them listed under the savings part. But for the protection strategies, term life should be doing the heavy lifting. You may want to add on a permanent life and policy for like a death and burial policy or something like that. There's legitimate reasons to add it as a protection vehicle. But in general, the term insurance should be doing the heavy lifting there.
Unfit people pay even less, right?
Yeah. Part of the reason why they got $1.75 million of coverage for $82 for almost 10 times the coverage amount for like 1/4 of the price, 1/3 of the price, was because they're in their 20s and they're healthy. As you get older and you start to have, health problems, the price only kind of goes up. So it's oftentimes a good idea, especially if you're newly married and you want to have kids, go out, do a life insurance needs analysis with somebody, figure out how much benefit you want to get, buy a 30-year policy while you're young and healthy, and that's going to last you into your 50s. At which point, you will have enough money saved into your 401k that you could still go out and buy more life insurance, but you don't need it to keep your wife from being homeless if you die.
What about some getting a life insurance from work?
Yeah, so life insurance from work is an interesting one. There's a couple of, there's an upside, which is up to a certain death benefit amount, the employer actually gets, as I'm recalling, Scott can correct me on this, the employer actually gets to write it off on their taxes, and it's not taxable to you as income. So there's this nice little carve out in the tax code where it's like really tax efficient and the death benefit stays tax free. But most of the time when you see life insurance through employers, if they're paying for it, you're looking at like a $200,000 to $400,000. It's usually a multiple of your salary. So it's like 4x your annual salary. So if you're at $80,000 a year and it's a 4x multiple, they will cover you for $320,000. $320,000 is good, but it may not be as much as you need for all of the things that you want to do if you get run over by a truck. And if you leave that company and go somewhere else, there's no guarantee that your new employer is also going to offer that kind of life insurance coverage. And in the interim, you may have had a health issue which will bar you from buying life insurance when your new employer won't offer it.
What about if your job also offers life insurance plus? Like they'll have one that will cover for you, but they also offer life insurance that you can also pay for you or a family.
Yeah, you'd have to consider it on a case-by-case basis, probably.
And shop the premium too.
Yeah.
So what does your company charge
The
and go out on the open market?
Yeah, and the other consideration here is, and this is true of the disability insurance as well, on life insurance and disability insurance, how they price this is they basically group you together in, I believe it's typically 5-year blocks. So you'll get a price that's kind of like based on the health of the average American around you in that age category. And every 5 years, when you move up from your 26 to 30s to your 31 to 35s to your 36 to 40, every 5 years you go up, that price increases. And if your employer is not picking up all of the bill, you're going to see it being deducted out of payroll at an increasing amount. Versus if you go out and you buy your own coverage, you're locking in a price for the full duration of coverage, and that's true of group life and group disability. So locking in a set price for as long as you need it is oftentimes a really good idea. Talking through life insurance, I am a big fan of, so when I'm meeting with people, oftentimes what I'll do, and if you guys want to do this by yourselves, sit down for married couples, figure out, it's very easy to be like, I think I should just get $1 million of term insurance coverage, or I think $500,000 is plenty, fine enough. I'm like, well, okay, do this, sit down, figure out what you want to accomplish if you get run over by a truck tomorrow. For me, it was I want to replicate a certain percentage of income for Sarah all the way through when I would have retired otherwise. probably less than I hope to actually make, but enough for her to comfortably live on and maybe set some money aside for retirement, because at the end of the day, I don't want her to have to get remarried to be able to make ends meet if I get run over by a truck. I also wanted to pay the house off, and I wanted to be able to provide my kids some sort of basically sending forth. But whatever those goals are for you, figure out, do you want to pay off debts? Do you want to replicate a percentage of your income? For stay-at-home, for homemakers, oftentimes it's, hey, if the wife passes away and she's homeschooling the kids, what's the husband going to do? Is he going to quit his job and homeschool the kids? Well, maybe that's the answer, and so you got to replicate his income and if she passes. Or maybe it's, hey, I'm going to have to send them to a charter school, and they're 7 years old right now. Okay, well, what's the annual cost of a charter school? Where would you maybe want to send them? And let's plan for covering them until they get to 18 for that kind of a thing. So figure out what you want to have happen if you pass away, the time frames of those items, and then you can basically, and dollar amounts, and basically build out like a ladder. So oftentimes what happens is it doesn't make sense to buy a 30-year term insurance for $2 million. Maybe what makes sense is to buy a $1 million coverage for 20 years and a $1 million for 30 years, save the money, kind of basically tailor it to what you need. I'll move briefly here through disability insurance, and then I'll,
Hey, Nate,
yeah.
disability is so thick. You think we could just go ahead and transition?
No, I do want to talk about it just briefly. It is a very underserved, unloved topic, disability insurance. You got two major kinds. You got short-term disability, long-term disability. If you have never really quite understood what Aflac does, they sell short-term disability. Short-term disability is designed to, disability insurance in general is, okay, so life insurance protects you if you die. But what if you survive the plane crash because your dad didn't check the wing struts and and coolant blew up all over the windshield? Not that I would know anything about that. What if you survive and you can't work? Ironically, for disability insurance, everybody thinks of accidents. Accidents are about 9% of the reason why people go on disability claim. The most common reason is musculoskeletal. So I actually ran into, at a bar one time on a business trip, I ran into a guy who was kind of hunched over weird, and he was sitting at the bar, and I talked to him, and he was a dentist, and he was a well-paid dentist for like 8 years, 10 years out of school, and then he got retrolisthesis, which is where he was getting slip discs on his lower spine, and they had to go in and fuse his lower four spines, his lower four vertebrae, which meant he couldn't bend over anymore, which meant he couldn't be a dentist. And he had gone off and bought, he said, not one, not two, but 3 different disability insurance policies, and he was bringing in like $9,000 a month tax-free, starting when he was in his 30s, and they had paid it all the way till age 65. He had made bank because he had gone off and bought disability insurance. So disability insurance is, for the short-term stuff, is designed to protect you usually from a few weeks up to a year, and then it turns off. And that's usually things for, I got into a car accident and I just need some help getting myself back up and running. Long-term disability is more like permanent, and that is where it can really save your bacon if you are the breadwinner and now your wife has to push you around in a wheelchair and you can't make money anymore. Now what? That's where disability insurance is really important. And bottom line is, it's usually designed to provide about 60% of your income. So if you're making $100,000 a year, it will pay you $60,000 a year at most. And the reason is the carriers don't want you to not be motivated to get back to work if you can. So they will pay you 60% of your salary, but that 60% is tax-free if you're paying the benefits. So the way this works is if your employer is paying the premiums for disability insurance and you go on claim, you get benefits monthly from the insurance carrier. Those are taxable to you if the company was paying the premiums in general. If you were paying the premiums out of pocket, it's tax-free. So if you sign up for a $4,000 a month long-term disability policy and you go on claim, you're going to get $4,000 a month tax-free. And then there's a bunch of fine print items I've listed here under bullet point 4 there. There's a bunch of little levers. If you're looking at long-term disability in particular, it's more expensive than life insurance. It's a fairly major commitment. and it really pays to think through some of the nitty-gritty details. Don't just go off and buy the cheapest insurance that you can and assume that it's going to protect you in all circumstances. Things like partial disability. So, for example, if Scott is working as an accountant and he gets incredible migraines when he looks at the computer for longer than 3 hours at a time, he can still work as an accountant, but he's working far reduced hours, which means his income maybe drops to half of what it was. Well, under straight up disability definitions, he can still work. Tough love, sweetheart. But under a partial disability rider, it will cover him if he loses more than a certain percentage of his income, 70%, 85% of so if he sees a 15% or more drop in his income because he's partially disabled, some policies will pay out, some policies won't. So there's little fine print stuff in there to keep track of. Long-term care insurance, if you are between the ages of 50 and 70, this is for you. If you aren't, then you can probably just not think about it for now. And I'm happy to discuss long-term care insurance in detail, but I've got a pretty decent one-page summary. And then the last one here, I'll kick it over to Craig, is estate planning. This is also a very unloved topic, and you want the mic? He's coming over. Very unloved topic, and it's really easy for a lot of, especially young families with little kids, to buy some life insurance. I fall into this category. You bought some life insurance, and you're like, whew, I'm done. Like, not quite. Get an estate plan done with a qualified estate planning attorney. There's a bunch of reasons why, but I'll let Craig take it from there.
Thanks, Nate. I've done this for 35, 40 years. I'm retired now. So I've had a lot of experience with it. Let's start with a very simple idea that'll kind of expand. So what is probate? We've all heard about probate. What is probate, and why do we want to avoid it? Probate is a legal procedure that occurs in the courthouse of the county where somebody dies, and their task is to assist with the transfer of their assets to the right people. That's a good thing. I mean, think about it. A lot of people die where there's nobody, they don't have a system around, and probate is sitting there to help them do that. And the definition of probate, it helps you understand how you can avoid probate. So probate is aimed at assisting with assets that are in your name alone when you die. So, by definition, how can we not own things by ourselves and avoid probate? The most common one is joint ownership. So when a couple gets married and they start putting things in joint names like their home, maybe checking accounts, maybe a car title, anything on the death of the first goes to the survivor with no interference from probate. All you have to do is sort of take your car title to the Department of Revenue with your death certificate, and they'll clear the title and the car's in your name. The other way that you can avoid probate on an asset is by putting on a beneficiary. You've probably heard the terms TOD or POD. They stand for transfer on death or payable on death. So you can have a checking account and you can put your spouse or anybody else, a child, on that account as a TOD beneficiary, and upon your death, that person owns that account. You can put a TOD beneficiary on checking, savings, car titles, real estate. You can put TODs on your home. So you could have a plan that includes putting your home in joint names, which is what it was probably from the beginning. When the couple goes to buy the house at the closing, they're going to prepare the papers for it to be in joint names. And then you can also add onto that a beneficiary to name your children. So if the two of you died together in a fiery car crash, the kids, if they're adults, they'll all own what's in the home or the checking account. So that's a way to avoid probate.
Sorry, how do you do that? Can I just write that on a piece of paper?
No, no. You have to go with a vehicle, you've got to go into the Department of Revenue where you get your plates and say, I want to put a beneficiary on this title. And you surrender the title, and then they send you a new one with the names on there. For a house or any other piece of real estate, you got to get a lawyer to draft a deed. They call it a beneficiary deed. They don't call it a TOD, but they just call it a beneficiary deed. And that you can leave your house in joint names and then a separate beneficiary deed naming the children, say. Okay? So there are ways to avoid probate that are pretty straightforward. You just got to maybe talk to your estate planning lawyer. Am I doing this? Am I setting this up correctly? Yeah.
So like, sometimes you'll have both the man and wife on the same deed, I think, but maybe only one is on the loan.
Okay.
Is that right?
That's a rarity. Generally, the lender wants both people to sign a mortgage to support the loan, and they want both people signed on, obligated on the loan. But in your scenario, that's fine. If it happens to be let's say I'm single, I own my own house, I get married, I add my wife to the house with a deed. I don't have to tell the bank. So I'm.
You can't foreclose her on her just because she wasn't originally the one lended to?
No. No.
So if you were the guy that house was in your name, you were making all the payments on it, and she was in there for the deed, she's not responsible for paying the rest of the house off, or they come after the house, how's that?
She's not personally responsible, but they will come after the house. So as a practical matter, she's got to pay it off. You know, she may not be signed on the promissory note, but if they have a mortgage on the house, she's got to keep up.
There'll be a lien on the title of the house that lists the financial. That's right, right?
Yeah.
You've got a lien. The bank, if you own a mortgage, the bank has a lien against the property. It doesn't matter who.
Let's say you pass away, you owe money on it, but your house, your wife or your spouse is not on your mortgage, but she is on the deed to the house. Are they gonna want the lump sum at one time, or are they gonna work it out where she's making the same payments that you would make typically the payments?
The loans are usually inheritable, because I inherited a house from my mother, she died, I was the beneficiary. There's $160,000 loan on it, the loan is still in her name, but I'm paying it off. So the city knows, or county office knows that the house is now in my name.
So they're not gonna ask her, hey, you gotta pay off the house now. They'll assume that the loan can be assumed factor and stay on.
I think what you've got to expect is that each lender has their own set of rules. And you've just got to read the fine print or get a lawyer to read the fine print for you. Yeah. Okay.
I don't know what Craig is saying too on TOD, POD is something that this works well for is things with titles like cars and houses and financial accounts. Does not work as well for personal assets. So jewelry, furniture, the dog, things like that are oftentimes either going to go through probate or through a trust or something like that. There, you can't just like write it on a scrap of paper and be like, look, I scribbled it down and so-and-so gets the dog. And the courts are going to be like, it wasn't notarized.
Well, let's go to the next topic. We'll circle right around to that. So now let's talk about wills and a last will and testament. What is that? A will is a document where you get to announce who is the beneficiary and who will be the executor to administer that transaction. So some people will ask the question, well, if I have a will, then nothing has to go through probate, right? Wrong. It's exactly the opposite. The will is actually the document that governs the way things go through probate. So you still want to aim to utilize the techniques to avoid probate, but you still want a will. And probably the number one reason in this room for having a will is so that you can name guardians for your minor children. The only place that you can legally and effectively name a guardian for your minor children is in a last will and testament. You can't just write it down on a scrap of paper. So that's something that the young parents will want to consider, because that's where that decision is made. And you know, you often have a sequence of guardians, like, okay, the first person or the first couple, and then you can have a successor to them if they can't serve by the time it comes around. And of course, you ask these people, you know, you sit, have dinner with them and say, hey, would you be willing to take our kids if something happened to us? So the executor, or the personal representative, that's the term we use more today, is the person who administers that probate estate if there's assets that need to go through that. So it could be, you know, let's say you're young, you're single, you've got a car in your name, you've got a checking account, you don't own any real estate, you get married and you buy a house together, you put it in joint names so it goes to the surviving spouse. And even the checking account, you put in joint names, but you forget about the car and you leave the car in your own name, you don't even think about it. If you were to die, that car would need to go through probate unless you had gone in and put your spouse on as a co-owner or as a beneficiary. One of the other features that Nate alluded to is what we call the list of tangible personal property. You can keep a list of tangible personal property and who takes, but you have to have a last will and testament in which you have a short paragraph that says, I may maintain a list, and if I do, that list is to be honored. If you don't have a will and you have a list, it does not have any legal force and effect. Now, if you have a loving family and everybody sees that, chances are they're going to try to honor that list to the extent that makes sense. But if you said on the list, I give a certain item to my next door neighbor because they were a really good friend, and the rest of the family didn't like that neighbor, there might be a fight. But if you had a last will and testament that authorized such a list, it would be honored, okay? Another thing Nate alluded to is those lists cannot give away anything. There's a limited set of categories for the items that qualify to be given through a list. And one of the clues is the title, List of Tangible Personal Property. So you can't give away anything that's intangible. You can't give money. You can't give a CD. It's only physical stuff. So it's like, a set of collections, or furniture, or the dishes. You can give those, or tools. You can give those kinds of things. Heirloom kinds of things you can give away. But so many of the assets that Nate has talked to you about are available with beneficiaries to be designated. So when you plan with a planner, that person is going to say to you, okay, you're a couple, do you want both of you to own this particular asset that we're going to create now? And of course the answer is always going to be yes. And then do you want to put beneficiaries? And you can say, to our children in equal shares as beneficiaries if the two of you died. Okay, the next category is a revocable trust. So there are irrevocable trusts and revocable. Revocable trusts are ones that you maintain such authority and control over that you can amend them, you can tear them up, you can revoke them, you can get rid of them. But an irrevocable trust cannot be torn up by you, it cannot be revoked. In fact, probably you cannot even be the trustee because of the tax benefits that you're trying to acquire through it. Irrevocable trusts really are not a good topic for tonight because they're pretty high-end and very unique circumstances, wealth, a great deal of wealth, and usually much, much older people. So let's just focus for a few minutes on revocable trusts. Because a revocable trust is revocable and you retain the rights to amend it, you retain the rights to name the beneficiaries, You retain the rights to change the beneficiaries. Okay, this one child is wayward. We're going to reduce his or her share and give more to the ones that are not wayward. You retain all those rights. Because you retain all those rights, all the assets in that trust are deemed for tax purposes to be owned by you. So you won't gain through a revocable trust any high-end tax planning strategies of, well, whatever's in the trust the IRS doesn't know about and I can hide it from them. That's not the case at all. What's in the trust is yours for tax purposes.
As a quick point of clarification, when you have a revocable trust, it oftentimes does not have its own EIN number. It answers to your Social Security number, and there is no creditor or divorce protection. So if somebody sues you and you have assets in the trust, it's a little revocable trust. It's your money. There's no protections. Whereas in an irrevocable trust, it's set up correctly. When somebody sues you or divorces you or whatever, those assets are shielded against your personal ownership, and there are some protections on irrevocable trusts that are not available on revocable trusts. And when you die, your revocable trust turns into an irrevocable trust. You can set up an irrevocable trust while you're still alive, as well as a revocable. When you die, your revocable turns into an irrevocable.
Not necessarily.
No?
No. You can have a revocable trust, a single document that husband and wife create together, a joint revocable trust.
At the death of all the grantors, I'm sorry.
At the death of all the grant. So, so trusts get to name in them the beneficiaries to take, and that usually is my surviving spouse is the primary beneficiary, and upon his or her death, my children are the next generation of beneficiaries. Going back to probate, everything that I'm talking about with a revocable trust or an irrevocable trust avoids probate. So it's a major tool for avoiding probate. Yeah. I would say the average is probably a year to go through, and the dollar amounts are pretty small. It starts like at 5%, and then it slowly gets down to like 1%. It's nothing like what you hear people say, that probate is the absolute devil and all of your wealth disappears because it went through probate. That's not true. It's a pretty small cost. It's a terrible inconvenience. No one wants to do it. You're hiring lawyers. You're paying lawyers for that.
Now, 5% is on the value of the estate that's passing through probate. So if you die and you don't have like a beneficiary deed on your house, for example, and so now your house has to go through probate, oftentimes that if you've got $1 million estate going through, that 1 to 5% is $10,000 to $50,000. So it can be expensive, or it can be pretty cheap depending on if you've successfully avoided probate with the majority of your assets.
Yeah, yeah. But if all that goes through is, a $2,500 car and $500 of cash, say, it's pretty small and it can be very quick. Actually, there's a threshold, I think it's around $30,000, that if you're under $30,000 in the total amounts going through probate, there's a quick and easy, simplified probate that works very well. So, good question. All right, just as in a will, you get to name who the beneficiaries are. In the trust, you get to name the beneficiaries. One of the features of a revocable trust is that you can spread out the distributions to the next generation. So a typical joint trust would say, we together, husband and wife, we are the co-trustees. We manage it together. If one of us becomes incapacitated or deceased, the other alone is the sole trustee over all of it. And the children don't become beneficiaries at that point at all. the typical scenario is the guy dies first. So mom becomes the sole trustee and she controls and manages all of it for herself. Then upon her incapacity, the trust would be held for her benefit, all of it, for her being the primary beneficiary through her lifetime. Then upon her death, the trust might generally say, to the children in equal shares. Well, if all the children at that point are in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, your trust might say, just make outright distributions. Tie things up in 6 or 8 months, file a tax return, work through the lawyer, and make distributions, and each child gets their equal share. But if the children are way too young, in your view, to receive any significant amount of money into their own hands, then you can call for the trust to hold it back with new trustees that you get to name. You could name the oldest child if that person's old enough, or you could name a trust company or a good friend to manage the money. And then at the ages you pick, you could distribute to the children. So let's say you had $900,000 because you had lots of good life insurance when the two of you died, and you've got 3 kids. So the 2 of you are gone. So now it's broken into 3 equal shares, $300,000 for each of the children. And then you could say something like, hold it in trust, and for each share at their own ages, when they become 25, give them a third of it. When they become 30, give them another third. And when they're 35, give them the full balance and have a full distribution. And you can pick the ages, you can pick how many distributions there are, you can pick the trustee. So it's a very good tool for managing how you want your estate plan to unfold. So, if you're a young couple and you've not bought the big term life insurance and you really don't think you own very much, you might say, well, we'll push that off and we won't get some of these fancy things for a while. But if you're buying some significant term life insurance, maybe you go ahead and spend the money to get a revocable trust and name the beneficiary of the life insurance as the trust, and the trust receives it even upon the death of the first. So the husband dies, the $1 million comes in, goes into the trust, the surviving spouse is the trustee, she's the primary beneficiary, all that's held for her to get her through the balance of her life, and then upon her death, things go to the children in the fashion that you've selected.
I'll give a quick example of that. So I've got about $3 million in term life insurance on myself, and then I've got $750,000 on Sarah. So now you know if she asks you to kill me, or like how to bid that job, because that's what she's going to be getting. If it doesn't get paid back her. But so if we both died in a car accident, there's $3.75 million that we have going into our trust. The trust has parameters set up around while our kids are still minors, they can't legally take custody of those dollars. So it goes to my parents, and then it goes to my sister, and then it actually goes to Matt over here. I don't know if he knew that or not.
As trustees.
As trustees to both shepherd the dollars for the kids and also to take care of the kids. And as trustees, they can make distributions down to whoever's providing the care of the kids. So for example, if my mom and dad are taking care of the money, but they don't want to take care of the kids, they can kick the kids down to my sister. And then when my sister says, hey, we need money to go to Disneyland, my dad can be like, try somewhere else. And she's like, I meant Waterworld. Like, great, I'll send you some money. And so the trustee who's caring for the money doesn't have to be the person who's providing the daily care. While the kids are minors, the trust can provide for the needs of the minors on the discretionary basis of the trustee. And then once the kids turn 18, they can take custody of those dollars, and at the discretion of the trustee, those dollars can then be given to the kids starting in 18. And the way that Sarah and I have set it up is when they turn 18, at the discretion of the trustee, they can, and our 3 kids, and we're going to have more, hopefully, they can take over a third of that money. If they're not being responsible with their life or following Christ, the trustee, at the sole discretion of the trustee, they can be like, yeah, I know you're 18, but I just don't like the way you're living right now, so I'm not going to give it to you yet. There's no recourse for the kids because if they challenge the trust, they get excised from the inheritance completely. So there's protections built in for the trustee for that. And then they have our kids have until the age of 30 to be following Christ and living responsibly. If they aren't doing that by the age of 30, their third share goes to charities, which are deemable by the trustees. So there's a lot of really fine controls that you can build into a trust that you cannot do with a will or with just transfers on death. Sorry.
You
Thank
double
you.
the state or the estate tax deduction as well. If you're married, like it's whatever, 10 million each, and if you put it in a trust, don't you get you can protect the 20 million?
You get it without a trust, for sure. You have to get a file.
Well, because it's like if I died before my wife, like it, you know, wouldn't it cut in half and it'd only be a single person if I'm like in a will? I thought a trust.
If a trust,
If you set it up before the person.
if a trust says the right words and has the right provisions, it's set up so that each of the two spouses gets the full exemption. Yes, yes, yes.
But
Yeah.
even without a trust, you do maintain that portability. But I think you got to file with the IRS. There's something you got to do to carry like if the husband dies first, to carry over his lifetime exemption to the wife. You would know that.
Yeah,
Greg.
yeah.
You
Yeah,
can do it
that's-
without a trust, but
yeah.
it's definitely.
So let's just see how this would work. So, I die first, tragic plane accident. James Children's Trust. Jane then becomes a trustee. She dies 2 months later in a fiery crash. Nate becomes the trustee. Nate automatically, without any legal entanglements, just begins acting as a trustee because he's got the trust document. And then anybody asks any questions.
Death certificate and a copy of the trust document.
Right. And that's it. So that makes it very simple, very fast to transfer that control. Whereas probate could take a year or longer and consume 5%-ish typically of the assets in that 1 year. So it's really more costly about the control of the assets and the timeliness of that control. It's a big draw for the revocable trust. Is that true?
Absolutely true. That's a good observation.
And protections against things like divorce and lawsuits against your kids who are inheriting major assets. If they leave it in the trust and the trust is set up correctly, those assets are shielded in ways that they aren't shielded if you just leave it to them outright.
Right. So I'm just thinking about somebody like Scott, who has some assets but not lots of them. It might still behoove him to set up a revocable or irrevocable trust, and spend the money to get that to happen so that control would be quick and easy
Yes.
upon his passing. What is the typical cost for a well-done trust?
Non-complex will.
Non-complex will.
It's so Craig will say his answer. My answer is, based on the estate planning attorneys that I have worked with since Craig retired, is for a will-based plan where you don't have a trust, you're just doing a will, power of attorney, medical directives. You're looking at usually around $2,000 to $2,500, and if you throw a trust in there, you're looking at $3,000 to $3,500. There are levels of trust planning above and beyond that. So if you get into like Medicaid shelter trusts, now you're looking at like $7,000 to $10,000. But as a basic estate plan, $2,500 to $3,500 is a good price point with a wide trust.
Yeah, that's good.
$3,500 to protect, you provide specific protection against your assets. And you make sure that the trustee can very quickly take control and start distributing your money, including any insurance payments. All that happens very quickly and easily for the price of $3,500.
Yes. Yes.
And you're getting things like dirt and power of attorney. So if I get into a car accident and I'm breathing through a straw, and Sarah walks in, and Sarah walks in and she's like, pull the plug. And then my sister walks in and she's like, don't you dare pull the plug. The hospital's gonna be like, all right, who's got power of attorney to make this decision?
Okay, that's a good segue. So what happens if one of us becomes legally incapacitated, either with a stroke, through a car accident. Um, there are two major areas of our life that we want to have a document that will appoint someone to make decisions for us. One is healthcare decisions, like do we pull the plug, do we do another surgery, do we keep the chemo going, or do we stop? That's a document that is sometimes called a medical directive or a healthcare declaration. And in that, you can not only give this person that you're picking the right to make the medical decisions, but you give them the right to spend your money to fund those medical conditions, okay? So obviously for spouses, you typically name each other, and then but you want to have a successor. You know, what if the both of you are hurt in the car accident? Who's going to be named? So it might be a sibling, it might be the oldest child who's 28 years old. You've got a lot of choices. The other document is typically called a durable power of attorney, but it's for financial affairs and for legal affairs, not for medical decisions. And that's where you give this person the legal authority, where they can walk into any bank or financial institution, or walk into Nate and say, here, I'm appointed, I'm the official person to make legal decisions for my spouse or my friend. And you name each other. It's the same set of issues. Who do you name if the two of you, let's say one of you dies and the other is the one that's incapacitated? Who do you want to have named? So that's where a lot of the thinking goes into, you know, and of course you want to ask this other person, you know, would they be willing to do that if it's not an immediate family member?
So Craig, I think what I'm hearing you say is that it makes a lot of financial sense at relatively low estate size and at relatively young age. It still makes good financial sense to set one of these up, surprisingly good.
Well, it's not.
Yes.
And this is not just the trust. So when you think estate plan, you are, as part of an estate plan, you're getting a will. You may or may not be getting a trust. You should be getting a living will, medical directive. You're also getting powers of attorney, which can be springing and durable. All of that is contained, and
Yeah.
it's one of those things where it's easy to ignore because nobody wants to write a check for $2,500 to $3,500 for something that they're not even going to get any benefit out of. This is for the people who you're leaving behind. It's really easy to just kind of just ignore it, and you ought not to do that, especially if you've got if you're married with minor kids in particular, and you've gone to the effort of buying a life insurance policy. Well, if you own life insurance, you're probably spending $500 to $600 a year on life insurance every year. It really behooves you to set up the final safety net of protection for end of life, because Craig has seen this way more than I have, but even I've seen it. If the husband dies and there's no estate plan in place, it makes things at least 5 times harder on the wife to pick up the pieces and get her life moving on when she doesn't have power of attorney. So now when she shows up to the bank to try and like get them to talk to her, and the bank tells her to go pound sand without a power of attorney, and she doesn't have a power of attorney, like you've got to you've got to petition the court to issue basically injunctions to allow her. It's like it just takes so much more time and effort and pain on the family that you are leaving behind that were dependents on you if you don't have an estate plan. So you know
They're already in pain, because they just.
they're already going through a lot. The last thing you need to have them worried about is how the bank is not talking to them because they don't have a power of attorney. So arguably, possibly get your life insurance done first, but a short second to that is going to be getting an estate plan done. Spend the money, buy once, cry once. Get a estate planning attorney in particular. Kind of my rule of thumb when I refer this to people is I will not refer to an attorney that has 6 different areas of law and estate planning is listed last. I want to refer to somebody who does estate planning as one of the 1 or 2 primary areas of practice, and they're really good at it. It's worth spending the money to get it done.
How about some questions from other people in the back row? I'm sorry? Okay, the the term living trust means the same thing as a revocable trust. And the idea, putting the word living, it's very old. The idea was that you would create it while you were living. Way back in the 60s that started. So it's not a good word. People don't use it too much anymore.
When I went to the doctor, I got the sheets for the medical, POA, and, do you have to go to a lawyer for that? She said just fill it out and get it certified.
Well, the forms they give you, I'm sure, are pretty good, and they will work for the limited function, but that's not a full estate plan. That's just a single little one piece of the puzzle. So, if you don't have a plan and you go to the doctor and they say, we can give this to you, go ahead and do it. But our recommendation is that you'd go ahead and get a fuller estate plan anyway.
We're going to talk about the pour-over will, that if you have a trust, but you get smashed by the dump truck and the estate sues the dump truck company.
Sure.
Be outside the trust.
This is it's a fine little point, a good point, but a fine little point. Just as your will is, you can say who takes, if something does go through probate, who gets it, right? That's what the will does. It only covers what's going on in probate. If you have planned with a revocable trust, then you make the primary beneficiary of your will, not your spouse, but the trust. So it pours that asset over into the trust. Good one.
Let's wrap it up. We're almost coming up on 9 o'clock.
How about one more?
In order to draft a beneficiary deed, where do you begin? Do you have to get an estate attorney?
You do. Yeah.
You start there.
Yeah, you can't do it yourself.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is it psychological technique to just make yourself buckle down and do it?
I think it's prayer. I really do. I think all of life should be bathed in prayer. Your prayer can be sort of, I know what my mind is telling me. I know what my heart is telling me. I have obstacles, but what do you want me to do, Lord? You show me, you tell me, you push me. Do you want me to do this? Do you want me to spend the money to do this? And let him lead. Yeah. Yes.
What options are there, or kind of when people have came to you and been like, okay, we have these kids, but I don't really want my parents to have them, and we don't really have any siblings that we want to give the kids to. Like, what are my options? But it's like, I don't have a friend that's willing to. I mean, we've got larger families in this church as well, so giving 4 kids to somebody is a lot. Like, what are options that can be done there, especially thinking through like, well, I don't know who would be the best person for my kids to go to at the time that I die. I mean, is it you just have to pick somebody and say, Lord willing, I hope this never happens, but Lord willing, like, would you be willing to take my kids over? What are the options even there to think through?
I think you've just sort of walked through the options. Once you've concluded that you really don't have anybody, you don't have much options. So there again, it's praying to God to bring, maybe you pray for meeting another couple with a family about like yours that you could get connected to. And over a couple of years, you could find that couple and get connected and trade willingness to be guardians. That's a tough one. You,
I was going to say anybody can put my name down, but I'll take your kids.
okay.
Not yours, Jane.
Paul?
Something that we did not, we never actually did it, I never followed through, but we didn't want our kids to go to my family, we didn't want our kids to go to her family, no, we don't want somebody living for the Lord. But we actually talked to an associate pastor that we knew from another church, and had no kids, that was associate pastor.
Hold on.
So what we did is, we'd already talked to him about this, we'd already been talking to him anyway at church.
Okay.
Familiar with me, and familiar with my wife, and we decided that they always liked kids, they never could have any, but he was an associate
Yeah.
Because we wanted to make sure they were still raised up in the Bible, and we wanted to make sure they were gonna get taken care of.
I love it. That's great.
I'll say one little thing there too. Is our minds have changed about that multiple times. And I mean, at different stages of life, people kind of come in and out of your life, but also I have adult children now. So it's something I would think you'd want to look over, and probably need to change. Is it easy to amend that? How difficult, do you gotta go pay another $3,000 to amend that?
No, typically, if the estate planning attorney that you wrote it with is still in business, it's oftentimes like $300 to $500 for you to sit down and you'll do an amendment or a restatement of the trust, and it'll be a lot shorter and basically slides in under the main trust document, and it's a lot cheaper. If the estate planning attorney that you did use has gone out of practice, some estate planning attorneys are willing to amend the trust that they didn't write for some sort of fee. A lot of them will want to rewrite it from scratch, and then you're back to paying the full $2,500 or $3,500. So, hire an estate planning attorney that's not 70 years old is something you should consider.
And one of the things you want to consider is if your choices, let's say you have, as you look at the family members that might be guardians, who you might pick as a guardian, is it a wise choice to pick the one single person that they always loved kids and always wanted to have kids but never got married? Or would it be better to name somebody, a family that's got even 4 or 5 or 6 kids? It's a much bigger impact on that single person than for a family of 5 or 6 to take 2.
Something else, like if you actually have more than one, say we did choose somebody, but now at some time it did happen, now they're not able to, should we have a backup, like backup to the backup?
It's always good to have the backup to the backup to the backup in any time you're naming either guardians or trustees or holders of your durable powers. It's always good to have 2 or 3, a sequence of people, so there's always a backup